The dark between the stars was silent and endless, yet something moved across it, carrying a voice that no one had expected. It came from Earth, traveling far through the empty black, from one relay to another, from one listening station to the next, until it reached the great halls of the Galactic Council, where the most powerful leaders of known space gathered in shining chambers of glass and silver. The message was short but sharp, and the words had a strange weight to them that made even the translators sound uneasy. "We know what is coming. We have seen it before." Commander Rin sat in his high seat, looking at the pulsing light that marked the message on the screen before him, wondering why the humans had sent it with such urgency and such calm. No other race sent warnings like this, and certainly not new members like Earth, who had only joined the Council a few cycles ago and who still had little voice in the great debates. Around him, the chamber echoed with the murmurs of ambassadors from dozens of worlds, their tones full of disbelief and amusement, and even mild annoyance, as if the humans had just made a childish mistake in sending a message meant for some private channel. The humans claimed that something dangerous was on the way, something that could not be stopped if it was ignored, something that would not care for treaties or weapons or borders, and yet they gave no clear proof, only their steady voice saying they had seen it before. Many leaders smiled, as if they were hearing an old myth told by children. Some laughed and shook their heads, saying Earth had always been too dramatic, too eager to make itself important in the affairs of greater powers. But Rin did not laugh, and he did not smile. There was something in the tone of that human voice that did not fit the image of a desperate species begging for attention. It was the voice of someone who knew they were right, even if no one believed them, the voice of someone who had walked through fire and survived, and now spoke of the flames without fear. The message kept repeating every hour on every channel the humans could access, and every time it was the same calm voice with the same heavy words, as if time itself did not matter, as if they would keep speaking until the galaxy finally listened. Rin leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing, as he watched the hologram of the human ambassador, Captain Mara, who stood at the center of the chamber waiting for the council to respond. Her uniform was dark and plain, with no decoration and no bright colors, only the small symbol of her home world on her chest. Her face was still, but her eyes were sharp, like they were measuring every movement in the room, every whisper, every look of dismissal from the other ambassadors. Rin had seen many officers from many worlds, but there was something different about her, something in the way she stood, as if the weight of the entire planet rested on her shoulders, and she had carried it for years without bending. One of the elder counselors from the Jalari spoke first, his voice smooth and almost amused, saying that the council had no time for vague warnings without data or analysis, or at least a credible source, and that the humans should keep their stories for their own people. Another counselor from the blue-skinned Navari suggested that Earth was trying to secure more defense funding by creating fear, and that this was nothing more than a political move. A third laughed outright and said that if something so dangerous truly existed, the great archives of the galaxy would already contain record of it, and no small world like Earth could be the first to know. Mara did not speak. She simply weighted her hands behind her back, her gaze steady. When the questions came, she answered them with the same words, as the message, "We know what is coming, we have seen it before." The chamber grew restless, and the council speaker finally cut the session short, saying that no action would be taken until proof was provided, and that humans should not spread unfounded panic in the current delicate political climate. The session ended, the lights dimmed, and the great doors opened to release the ambassadors into the vast corridors beyond. Rin rose slowly, still watching Mara, who turned to leave without looking back. He followed at a distance through the quiet hallways, his boots making a soft echo on the polished floor, until she stopped near a wide window that looked out over the curve of the planet below. She spoke without turning her head, her voice low and calm. "When it starts, you will remember this day." Rin asked what it was she thought was coming, but she did not answer, only looked out at the stars, as if searching for something far away, something that was already moving toward them. Outside the council building, the city lights of the capital world spread like rivers of gold across the dark ground, airships gliding between towers, and the glow of distant launch bays flashing as ships rose toward orbit. But Rin's thoughts were on the voice and the message, and the certainty in Mara's eyes. He had heard fear before, and this was not fear, this was knowledge, the kind that came from scars and memories that could not be erased. Back in the chamber, the council records marked the human warning as unverified and closed the file under low priority review. Yet even as the record was sealed, the message continued to play in the listening stations across the galaxy, always the same words, always the same calm tone, as if the speaker did not care how long it took for someone to believe them. In the weeks that followed, small news channels on fringe worlds reported the human message with mixed reactions, some calling it a brave stand, others calling it a foolish stunt. Most people paid little attention. The galaxy was wide and full of rumors, and most threats faded into nothing long before they reached the inner systems. But on the human home world, Earth skies were busy with ships moving in tight patterns, military craft training above oceans and deserts, and long lines of cargo freighters leaving orbit heavy with sealed containers bound for deep space. Inside hidden facilities far beneath the surface, engineers and officers worked without rest, their voices quiet, their movements quick, as they prepared something that few, even among humans, fully understood. Above them in the high orbit stations, human officers watched the star maps, their eyes locked on a distant sector of space where sensors had detected faint irregular shadows that did not match any known vessel. Rin did not know about the shadows, not yet, but he kept thinking about Mara's words and the way she had spoken them, not as a guess, not as a warning, but as a promise. In his own quarters, he played the recording again, letting the human voice fill the silence of the room. We know what is coming, we have seen it before. Outside his window, the stars seemed calm as always, but in the deep of his mind, he felt a weight that had not been there before, since that something was moving closer step by step across the void, and that when it arrived, it would not care whether the galaxy was ready or not. The council would forget the human words in time, they would bury them under other debates and other news, but Rin was certain he would not forget, because some part of him already believed, even if he did not want to admit it, not yet, not out loud, not to anyone. Beneath the deep waters of the Atlantic, far below the reach of sunlight, there was a hidden chamber carved into the stone of the ocean floor and sealed with heavy doors that had not been opened in decades. Few knew of its existence, and fewer still had ever stepped inside, for it was not a place of peace or beauty, but a vault of memories that most of humanity wished to forget. The walls were lined with old steel shelves, each one stacked with black containers marked only with numbers and silent warnings in faded paint. Inside these containers lay the records of a time before Earth joined the stars, before the Council, before anyone outside the solar system had even known humanity existed. Captain Mara stood in the center of the chamber, her hands behind her back, her eyes scanning the long rows of sealed memory cores as the sound of dripping water echoed faintly from somewhere in the dark. Beside her, an old soldier named Hale walked slowly, his uniform worn and plain, his left arm replaced with a machine limb of ancient design. He had fought in the war that the Council claimed had never happened, the war against the Hollow Hunger. They called it that because there was no better name for a force that did not speak or negotiate or rest, a force that stripped planets of life and left only empty shells drifting in the cold. The hunger had come to the edge of human space long before Earth had ships fast enough to call for help from other worlds. It had destroyed colonies and stations and fleets with the same silent method, always arriving, without warning, always leaving nothing alive. Hale had been there when the first human fleet had faced the hunger, and he had lived when almost no one else had. He remembered the silence and the calms, the way the stars themselves seemed to dim as the swarm surrounded them. Mara stopped before one of the oldest containers and entered a code that only a few still knew. The lock released with a heavy hiss, and she pulled out a thin black device. With a flicker, it came alive, and a ghostly image formed in the air above it. It showed a burning sky, a fleet of ships firing desperately into a sea of black shapes that moved like shadows given life. The sound was muffled and warped by age, but the voices of the crew could still be heard, shouting orders and warnings that grew shorter and sharper until the only sound left was static. Hale said quietly that this was the third colony to fall, and that by then they already knew they were losing. He told Mara that the hunger did not simply destroy, it consumed, and that no scan had ever found traces of the matter it took, as if it erased everything from reality itself. The official records of the Council contained no mention of such a war. When Earth had joined the Galactic Council, the history shared had been carefully shaped to make humans appear as a young race, still learning, still harmless. No one had wanted to reveal that humanity had once fought an enemy that could not be stopped, and that they had barely survived only by sacrificing worlds and lives without hesitation. Mara believed that the Council's archives were missing this history not by accident, but by choice. Someone long ago had erased every trace, perhaps because the hunger had visited their worlds as well, and they had chosen to forget rather than live with the knowledge that it could come again. The old soldier moved deeper into the chamber and unlocked another container. Inside were maps marked with red arcs, showing the path of the hunger across human space and the locations where fleets had made their last stand. Most of the arcs ended in small marks shaped like broken circles, meaning total loss. Mara studied the maps and saw something that made her skin grow cold. The path of the old attacks matched almost perfectly with the sectors where recent disappearances had been reported. She realized that the hunger was moving in the same way it had before, and that the timing matched the human warning almost exactly. Above them on the surface of Earth, storms rolled over the oceans, while in orbit human ships gathered in tight formations ready to depart. In hidden training bays, soldiers were preparing weapons that the Council had never seen, weapons that had been designed in the last days of the Old War when humanity had nothing left to lose. Mara knew that many of these weapons were forbidden by Council law, but she also knew that without them, there would be no chance to stop what was coming. Hale turned off the old recordings, and the chamber sank back into quiet darkness. He told her that he had lost more friends in that war than he could count, and that every night since he had seen their faces in his dreams. He said that when the Council ignored the human warning, he was not surprised because they were doing the same thing humanity had done before the first attack, pretending the danger was far away and would never reach them. Mara asked why he had kept these records hidden when they could have been shown to the Council as proof. Hale shook his head and said proof means nothing if the one who sees it does not want to believe, and that the Council would only find ways to explain it away or claim it was falsified. The only way to make them understand would be for the hunger to appear before their own fleets, and by then it would be too late. The captain felt a heavy weight in her chest as she left the chamber with the old soldier. The water above pressed down with a silent force, and the distant hum of the ocean reminded her of the endless dark between the stars, where the hunger was even now moving toward the heart of the galaxy. On the journey back to the surface, she sent a coded message to human command stations across the colonies. The message was simple: accelerate all preparations, double patrols, increase deep space sensor sweeps, and recall all long-range exploration vessels. Above the Atlantic, the clouds split as a black carrier ship rose from the water, its hull glistening with drops of the sea. It climbed toward the upper atmosphere, carrying Mara and the old soldier toward orbit where more ships waited. In the great halls of the Council far away from Earth, the warning file from humanity sat sealed in the archives, untouched since the day it was dismissed. The ambassadors had moved on to other matters: trade routes, border disputes, resource allocations, all the politics that seemed important when no threat was visible. Yet in the far reaches of space, something stirred. A silent wave of motion passed through a system where the suns burned dim and the planets were cold and lifeless. Sensors hidden on an old mining station caught a shadow crossing the stars and transmitted a faint signal before falling silent forever. The signal reached an outpost near the edge of human space, and from there it was sent to Earth, where it was received in a deep command bunker under the mountains. When Mara saw the reading, she knew it was not a mistake and not a natural object. It was the first confirmed sighting of the hunger in this era, and it was exactly where the old maps had predicted it would be. She looked at Hale, and he looked back at her, without speaking, because no words were needed. The past was no longer buried, and the future was no longer a question. Somewhere far beyond the Council's reach, the hunger was coming again, and humanity would face it with or without allies. As the carrier docked with the flagship, in orbit the human fleets began to move their drives, burning bright against the black void. Every ship carried the memory of the old war. Every soldier carried the weight of the old scars, and every leader knew there was no more time to wait for permission. The truth of Earth's history had been hidden, but now it would be written again in fire across the stars, whether the galaxy wanted to see it or not. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with light and sound, and the voices of many worlds blending into a restless tide. Walls of crystal reflected the glow of the stars beyond the tall windows, and every seat around the curved table was taken by leaders and envoys from across the galaxy. In the center stood Captain Mara, the human envoy, her posture straight, her hands behind her back, her dark uniform, without any decoration except the small silver emblem of Earth over her heart. Before her floated the council speaker, a tall being with eyes like polished stone whose voice carried easily through the chamber without effort. The speaker called for silence, and the last echoes of conversation faded into the high ceiling. Now came a moment for the vote. The human message had been played again for all to hear, the same words as before, calm, steady, certain. We know what is coming, we have seen it before. Mara had offered no further explanation, only the same warning that had been sent across the stars in countless transmissions. The other envoys shifted in their seats, their expressions ranging from amusement to open irritation. The Jalari ambassador leaned forward, his pale hands folded together as he spoke in a slow, measured tone, suggesting that the humans were motivated by fear and by the desire to place themselves at the center of interstellar politics. His words were met with approving murmurs from several delegations. Then the Navari delegate, a tall figure in shimmering blue robes, rose and declared that humanity was still inexperienced in the affairs of the greater galaxy and prone to exaggeration, and that the Council had more pressing matters than chasing shadows in empty space. Others joined in with their own dismissals, each one more confident than the last, claiming that if such a threat truly existed, it would have been recorded in the archives of the great civilizations long ago. The Anoran representative laughed, openly saying that Earth's warning sounded more like an old ghost story than a matter for serious discussion, and that the galaxy had no need to panic over bedtime tales. Mara stood without moving through it, all her gaze fixed on the curved table, as if the words were passing through her without effect. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and even, and her words were the same as before. We know what is coming, we have seen it before. There was no desperation in her tone, only certainty, and that certainty unsettled a few who listened closely, though they would not admit it. Commander Rin sat 2 rows from the speaker, watching her carefully, his mind turning over the memory of the recordings he had heard, the ones taken from the hidden vault beneath Earth's oceans. He knew she was holding back more than she had said, but the Council had no patience for half-truths and no taste for unpleasant possibilities. The speaker called for the vote, the results flashing in the air above the table, a pattern of lights showing overwhelming rejection of the human proposal for investigation or defense. The motion was denied, no further action would be taken, and the matter was closed in the official record. A low hum of satisfaction filled the chamber as delegates turned to one another, speaking of other issues to be discussed: trade routes, border disputes, mineral rights, and diplomatic arrangements that seemed more real and more urgent than the distant warning of a single world. Mara inclined her head to the speaker, thanked the Council for its time, and stepped back from the center without another word. As the meeting ended, the great doors opened and the delegates began to file out, their robes trailing across the polished floor, their voices rising again in dozens of languages. Rin waited until Mara passed near him, and then he fell in a step beside her. She glanced at him once, but said nothing until they reached a quiet corridor lined with tall windows that looked out over the sprawl of the capital city below. There the air was cooler, and the noise of the chamber faded behind them. "When it starts, you will remember this day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a weight that seemed to settle on Rin's shoulders. He asked her what it was that would start, but she did not answer. Instead, she kept walking, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the glass, as if she could already see something moving out there in the dark. Rin stopped to watch her go, wondering why her words felt less like a prediction and more like a promise. Outside the council, building the streets of the capital were alive with speeders and airships, their lights weaving through the night, while above the planet orbital lanes glittered with the movement of hundreds of ships arriving and departing. The council chambers stood at the highest point of the city, a tower of glass and steel surrounded by terraces and gardens and guarded by the finest soldiers in the core worlds, yet none of its beauty or security could quiet the thought now pressing in Rin's mind. In his quarters that night, he called up the human message again, letting it play in the dim light of his room. The voice came through clear, even after many repetitions, calm, measured, unshaken. "We know what is coming, we have seen it before." He thought of the other delegates laughing and shaking their heads, thought of the old soldier Hale, whose name he had seen in the classified reports, and thought of Mara's eyes when she spoke those words. It was not fear he had seen there, but something older, something forged in a place where fear had already burned away, leaving only resolve. Far from the capital world, the human fleets continued their quiet preparations. Carriers moved from dock to dock without fanfare, crews loaded supplies into holds, and engineers worked long hours on ships whose designs the council had never been shown. In deep space, human sensor arrays extended their reach, scanning sectors that the council considered unimportant, listening for signals that no one else believed existed. Rin knew none of this yet, but he could feel the edges of it in the way Mara carried herself and in the stubborn persistence of the human transmission that still repeated every hour across dozens of channels. The dismissal had been final in the record, but not in the hearts of those who had sent the warning, and he suspected that whatever the humans feared, they would act against it with or without the permission of the council. As the days passed, the warning faded from the public news streams, replaced by stories of political rivalries and economic agreements. Yet in the quiet spaces between official reports, strange rumors began to spread among the crews of distant patrol ships. Rumors of systems gone silent, of stations found empty, and drifting of shadows moving through the dark between the stars with no transponders and no heat signatures. None of these rumors reached the council floor, not yet, but Rin knew enough of politics to understand that by the time such reports were admitted into official discussion, it would already be too late. He stood once more at the tall windows, looking out over the bright sprawl of the city and the darker stretch of sky beyond where the stars burned with steady light. He imagined something moving there, just beyond sight, something vast and patient and unstoppable. And in that moment, he found himself remembering Mara's voice and her words and wondering if he should have spoken in her defense, even if it would have changed nothing. In the distance, a transport ship lifted from the spaceport, its engines flaring gold as it climbed toward the orbital lanes. Rin watched it vanish into the night and thought again of the humans who even now might be moving their fleets into position for a fight the rest of the galaxy did not believe was coming. He wondered if, when the truth arrived, it would come as a single blow or as a slow shadow creeping over the stars until it swallowed everything the council had sworn to protect. The first report came from the far edge of Orion space, carried by a small courier ship that arrived days behind schedule, its hull scorched and its systems barely holding together. The crew spoke little, and their faces were pale as they handed over the data core to the station commander, then left without waiting for questions. Inside the core were readings from a mining colony built into the rock of a cold moon, turning in the shadow of a gas giant. The colony was home to over 12,000 workers and their families, but the last entry in its log was over 2 weeks old. There were no signs of battle, no distress calls, no request for aid. The final transmission was a simple maintenance report, and then silence. The station commander sent the data to the council relay as protocol demanded, but he also forwarded a copy to a human listening post hidden in a nearby asteroid field, knowing it would reach them faster. At the council, the report was marked for review and set aside under non-urgent status. At the human post, however, the moment the data was received, alarms began to sound and coded orders were sent across secure channels to ships already on the move. 2 weeks later, another report came, this one from a patrol ship sent to investigate the missing colony. The ship never returned. The council claimed it was a malfunction, that the ship's drives had failed and its crew would be rescued when time allowed, but no rescue mission was launched. Commander Rin read the official notice and felt a twist in his chest. He had begun keeping track of these incidents, marking them on his private star charts with small red points, each one another place that had gone quiet, another place that the council refused to discuss. The points were forming a pattern. In a private meeting room, far from the main chamber, Rin met with Captain Mara, who stood at the window, staring into the swirling colors of the capital planet's upper atmosphere. When he told her about the pattern, she only nodded and said it matched what they had expected. "What exactly are you expecting?" Rin asked, but she only said that soon he would see for himself. A week later, a cargo hauler drifted into a trade route near the border of human and council space. It was moving slowly, without lights, without any power signature, its hull scarred with deep grooves, as if something had torn through it. A salvage crew approached cautiously and boarded, but found no one inside, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no supplies or equipment remaining. The ship was completely hollow. The salvage captain described it as a carcass picked clean, and his words spread quietly through the underworld channels where smugglers and traders shared stories the council preferred not to hear. When the images of the hauler reached Rin, he felt the same cold weight in his chest that he had felt the first time he heard the human warning. The grooves in the hull matched the damage shown in the old recordings from Earth's secret vault, the ones of ships lost in the war against the hunger. That night, he could not sleep, and when he looked out at the stars from his quarters, they no longer seemed calm or steady, but distant and watchful. On Earth, human fleets were no longer moving in secret. They were moving with purpose. Convoys of black hole warships left orbit in tight formations, their drives burning white against the darkness. Supply ships followed, heavy with munitions and equipment. In the desert's mobile launch sites unfolded like steel flowers, sending sleek interceptors into the sky, while in the ocean, submarines surfaced long enough to transfer sealed containers to waiting carriers before diving again. Everywhere, there was the feeling of a people preparing for something they knew was coming. Far from the council's eyes, a human recon ship was stationed in a barren system at the edge of map space, its crew watching a patch of empty void where their sensors had picked up faint, irregular readings. For days, nothing changed. Then, without warning, the readings surged, a wave of motion crossing the edge of their range, moving faster than any natural object could. The shapes were dark against the stars, darker than the space around them, moving with a strange flowing pattern that made them hard to track. The recon crew sent a burst transmission back to Earth before shutting down all systems and drifting cold in the hopes of avoiding detection. Only one more message came from them, a single line repeated 3 times: contact, made contact, made contact, made. After that, there was nothing. Mara received the report in a command room deep beneath the human capital. She read it without speaking, then ordered all fleets to initiate Phase 2 of their deployment. Rin heard about the report not from the council, but from a friend in the intelligence branch who sent him a short anonymous note, reading, "You were right." The next day, the council chamber was full of talk about border disputes between 2 trade sectors, no mention of the missing colony, the vanished patrol, the hollow hauler, or the silent recon ship. Rin sat through the debates, his eyes unfocused, his mind replaying the words of the human message, "We know what is coming, we have seen it before." Outside the chamber, he met Mara again. This time, she was not calm. She was sharper movements, quicker eyes, scanning every shadow as they walked. She told him that when the hunger reached the core worlds, it would already be too late to prepare, that the only chance was to fight it before it spread, and that humans were going to do exactly that. Rin asked her if she truly believed they could win. She said winning was not the point, surviving was. The last sign came not from a sensor or a patrol, but from a place that should have been beyond danger. A small agricultural world inside the council's inner ring stopped responding to regular communication. At first, it was thought to be a local system failure, then a storm, then a simple error. But when a fast courier arrived to investigate, they found the surface abandoned, the cities empty, the fields untouched, as if every living thing had simply vanished. The courier crew fled without exploring further, carrying with them the final proof that something was moving closer much faster than anyone wanted to admit. When Rin saw the images from that world, the quiet streets, the open doors, the machines, still running with no hands to guide them, he felt a deep certainty settle inside him. The humans had been right from the beginning, and the Council's choice to ignore them had already cost lives that could never be counted. That night, the stars over the capital seemed brighter than usual, but to Rin they no longer offered comfort, only the reminder that somewhere out there in the darkest shadow was moving toward them, and there was nothing in the official record to stop it. The orders went out in silence across encrypted human channels, each message carried by couriers who never stayed in the same place twice and who destroyed their ships after delivering the words. The fleets that had been moving quietly now gathered in prearranged positions far from trade routes, their black holes blending into the dark between stars. On Earth, the skies were filled with constant motion, heavy lifters moving cargo to orbit shuttles, ferrying personnel from secret bases in the mountains and under the seas to staging points beyond the moon's shadow. Everywhere, there was a sense of urgency, as if a clock was running down, though no one outside the inner command knew the exact moment it would strike zero. Commander Rin was brought to one of these staging points, not by invitation from the Council, but by Captain Mara herself, who came to his quarters late at night, her face, heart, her voice low, as she told him he had a choice to make. He could return to his seat in the chamber and watch the stars grow darker until it was too late, or he could see what the humans were preparing and decide if he would help them. The transport that carried them was small and fast, its interior stripped of anything unnecessary, its crew silent. As they moved through the dark, the only light the glow from the pilot's console. Hours later, they emerged into a system that seemed empty at first, but as the ship's filters adjusted, the view changed, and Rin saw them. Hundreds of ships drifting in tight formation, their hulls coated with stealth material that absorbed the light, making them almost invisible, the only sign of their presence, the faint outlines where they blocked the stars. Mara took him aboard the largest of these ships, a carrier the size of a small city, with decks stacked with fighters and dropships, its hangars alive with crews running drills, loading weapons, calibrating shields, every movement precise, every action rehearsed. In the command center, a vast display showed the edge of known space, marked with dozens of red points, the same points Rin had tracked on his private chart. But here the points were connected by arcs and lines, and each line led to a larger red mark labeled projection. The projection showed where the hunger would strike next. A grim-faced admiral explained that the humans had been mapping the advance for months, that they had learned its speed, its feeding patterns, its strange flowing movement through space that ignored all natural paths. Everywhere it touched, life vanished in days, sometimes in hours, leaving only silent worlds and cold ships behind. Rin listened as the admiral laid out the plan. It was not a simple defense. It was a hunt. The fleets would move ahead of the hunger's path, using bait ships to draw it into controlled zones where heavy strike groups would hit it with everything they had. The humans did not speak of destroying it, only of slowing it, forcing it to reveal itself, forcing it to feed on prepared targets, while the fleets learned more about its structure, its limits, its weakness, if it had any. The admiral said the council would never approve the plan because it placed entire systems at risk as bait, but the humans had already chosen the systems, abandoned colonies, forgotten stations, empty worlds that could still appear alive to the hunger senses. Mara added that they would not ask the council for permission or even for help because they could not risk the delays, the arguments, the endless talk. Instead, they would move now before the pattern reached the core worlds, before the council could even admit there was a threat. Rin asked why she had brought him, and she said because there were still a few in the council who could act without telling the others, who could move resources in the shadows to support the fight without alerting those who might stop it. She told him he was one of those few, and that his decision in the next hour would decide whether thousands lived or died in the first wave. Rin walked the decks of the carrier, seeing the faces of the crews, their eyes steady, but their jaws tight, knowing they were heading into something that few in the galaxy even believed was real. In the armory's weapons were lined in perfect rows railguns, plasma launchers, missiles with warheads tuned to burn for hours inside an atmosphere or cut through the hull of a dreadnought in seconds. Engineers worked without pause, checking shield matrices, calibrating drive fields, ensuring every system could run under maximum strain for days. In the fighter bays, pilots sat in their cockpits, running through simulations, their hands steady on the controls, their voices calm over comms as they spoke in short, clipped phrases. Rin could see there was no hesitation here, only readiness, the kind born from knowing there was no other choice. When he returned to the command center, the Admiral was already moving pieces on the display, shifting squadrons to match new intelligence from the edge of the void. A recon drone had made brief contact with the Hunger before being lost. Its last images showed a shape so vast it blocked the stars, moving in a way that made no sense, as if it were not a single object, but thousands of smaller forms flowing together. The Admiral said they believed the Hunger was not a creature, but a swarm, each part capable of moving on its own, but drawn together by some shared instinct or purpose. This explained why it could appear in multiple places at once, why it could vanish from sensors, only to strike somewhere far away moments later. The first engagement would take place in less than 2 weeks' time at a dead system known as Far Reach, chosen for its position on the swarm's projected path and its lack of living colonies. The bait fleet would light the system with false transmissions, power signatures, and surface activity to draw the swarm and then retreat behind a wall of mines and automated turrets while the strike groups closed from 3 sides. Every detail had been tested in simulations, every angle considered, every escape route mapped. Still, the Admiral warned no plan survived first contact, and they had no idea how the swarm would react once under sustained fire. Rin thought of the council chamber with its polished floors and endless speeches, and knew that nothing in that place could prepare anyone for this. When the hour came, Mara asked for his answer, and he told her he would help. He would use his position to move resources quietly to cover the human fleets with supply drops and to block any council intelligence teams that might try to interfere. Mara nodded once and signaled to the Admiral, who marked a new code on the display, identifying Rin as a shadow ally. As the transport carried him back to council space, Rin looked out at the dark shapes of the human fleets, waiting in silence, and felt a strange calm. The humans were not waiting for permission, they were not waiting for hope, they were moving because they knew what was coming, and they refused to meet it unprepared. And somewhere beyond the edge of those quiet stars, the Hunger was still moving, flowing like a tide that no wall could hold back, searching for the next place to feed. The silent black fleet moved into the Far Reach system with precision, the bait ships taking up position around the dead planet, their engines burning faint trails to mimic civilian traffic, while power grids on the surface lit up to look like a thriving settlement. From a distance, it would seem like a busy world with small transports moving between orbital stations and the planet cities. But in truth, every building, every light, every ship was an illusion crafted by drones and hollow structures built for this moment. Hidden beyond the system's edge, the strike groups waited, their ships cold and silent, their hulls coated in materials that drank in starlight, while automated mines floated in a vast invisible wall around the bait planet, ready to ignite when triggered. In the command deck of the human carrier, Admiral Voss stood with Captain Mara and a dozen officers watching the tactical display, which showed only faint static where the Hunger was expected to arrive. Rin sat in the shadows behind them, his mind struggling to accept the calm that hung in the air, because every person here knew that when the Hunger came, it would not announce itself, it would simply be there. Hours passed with nothing but the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Then, without warning, the edge of the display began to ripple, as if space itself were bending. At first there was nothing to see, only strange distortions where the stars should be. Then shapes began to form, blotting out the light, like black waves rolling in from the dark. The Hunger had arrived. It did not move like a fleet or a single creature. Instead, it flowed like smoke and water, all at once, hundreds of thousands of fragments, swarming together in shifting patterns, sometimes breaking apart, sometimes forming vast walls that blotted out whole sections of the system. Sensors struggled to read it, as if the swarm were wrapped in some field that scattered every scan and confused every signal, but the faint traces they could get showed mass readings so high they barely made sense. The bait ships began broadcasting distress signals as planned, their transmissions desperate, their engines flaring bright as they pretended to flee toward the far side of the planet. The swarm reacted instantly, surging forward in waves, moving faster than any natural formation, could each fragment twisting and turning with impossible coordination. The first mines ignited as the swarm crossed into the trap, a chain of brilliant explosions tearing through the black shapes and sending fragments spinning away, but for every one destroyed, another seemed to form from the pieces. Admiral Voss gave the order, and the strike groups lit, their drives emerging from the dark like hunters, their weapons already locking onto targets. Railguns fired long, glowing streaks across the void, while plasma lances cut through the swarm in burning arcs, the heat blooming in sudden bursts that painted the dark in flickering light. For a moment it seemed to work. Fragments broke apart and drifted away, small clusters collapsed under the assault. But then the swarm shifted, changing shape in an instant, forming massive shields of interlocked fragments that absorbed the fire before rushing forward. The first human squadron to engage was swallowed whole, their ships vanishing into the black mass, their distress calls ending in static. Mara clenched her jaw and ordered the second wave to cut across the swarms, flank the fighters weaving between larger ships to strike from unexpected angles. Missiles streaked into the mass, exploding in silent fireballs that threw fragments in every direction, but again the swarm adapted, the pieces coming back together in strange, spiraling motions, as if nothing had happened. Rin could not look away. The sheer scale of it was beyond anything he had imagined, each fragment the size of a small craft, yet moving with the precision of a living thing, and each one carrying a hunger that could be felt even through the cold hull of the carrier. The humans fought without pause, their formations shifting and reforming to keep pressure on the swarm. But the enemy was learning too. It began ignoring the bait planet, entirely focusing on the ships themselves and closing the distance with terrifying speed. Voss ordered the automated turrets to open fire, the hidden weapons around the planet coming to life with blinding streams of energy that cut deep into the swarm, forcing it to split apart. The split gave the strike groups an opening, and they took it diving into the gaps to unleash concentrated fire that tore whole sections of the swarm into drifting shards. For a brief moment the tide seemed to turn, the swarm pulling back as if reconsidering the fight, but then new readings appeared on the display. More masses were entering the system from the far side, larger than the first wave, moving with the same fluid coordination. It became clear this was only the beginning. The swarm had sent scouts first, and now the main body was arriving. Voss did not hesitate. He ordered the bait ships to detonate their cores, flooding the system with a blinding wave of radiation and electromagnetic disruption. The blasts ripped through the swarm, sending pieces spinning away and breaking the formation long enough for the strike groups to retreat behind the minefield. As the human fleets pulled back, the swarm began to flow again, its fragments moving around the destroyed ships and absorbing the debris as if feeding. Rin realized with a chill that the swarm was not just destroying ships, it was taking them piece by piece and adding them to itself. Mara turned to him and said this was why they could not wait for the council to decide, because every moment the swarm grew larger and smarter. The fleets regrouped at the edge of the system, the bait planet, now a glowing ruin. The automated turrets burned out from overuse, but the swarm had been slowed, at least for now. Lost reports came in, dozens of ships gone, hundreds of crew missing or confirmed dead, and yet the mood on the command deck was not defeat. They had faced the hunger and lived. They had forced it to reveal its patterns and to take damage, even if the cost was high. Voss called it a victory, but a small one, and warned that the swarm would remember this trap the next time. As the fleets turned away from far-reach, Rin stared at the display. One last time, the swarm, still moving in the wreckage, its fragments shifting and merging in patterns that almost looked like thought. He wondered if they had just fought an enemy or awakened one. The fleets moved through the dark between stars, their drives running low, their crews exhausted. But no one dared rest, because every sensor sweep, every faint reading could be the swarm following them through the void. On the flagship, Admiral Voss gathered his officers in the war room, the dim lights casting long shadows across the table, where a single projection glowed, showing the path to a distant and uncharted system far beyond known space. This system had no name on any chart. It was a black zone sealed by ancient warnings and scattered myths whispered by old explorers who swore that no one returned from its reach. Voss explained that long before the hunger appeared, Earth's first deep scouts had found something. There's something buried in the core of a dying star, something older than humanity itself. Records hinted that it was a weapon not made by humans, but by a civilization so ancient its traces were dust and light, yet still the device had remained functional, as if waiting. The Council had locked this knowledge away, fearing what would happen if it was ever awakened, but now Voss believed it was the only chance to stop the swarm before it reached the heart of human space. Rin listened with a growing unease, because the tone in Voss's voice was not one of hope, but of necessity. This was not a weapon, they understood, and using it might be as dangerous as the enemy they faced. The fleet split into smaller groups to confuse any tracking patterns, and Voss's flagship led the main force toward the black zone, the stars thinning until there was only darkness and the faint glimmer of the dying star ahead. As they drew closer, the ships began to shake with strange vibrations that did not come from engines or weapons, but from something deeper, something that seemed to hum through the metal of the hull and into the bones of every crew member. Then the scanners picked it up, a vast shape wrapped around the star itself, not orbiting, but anchored to it like a shell, its surface broken and scarred by ages, yet still intact. The structure was enormous, stretching across hundreds of kilometers, a ring of unknown alloy that pulsed faintly, as if alive, the hum growing stronger the nearer they came. Mara ordered the fleet to hold position, while a smaller team descended toward an opening in the ring where faint lights blinked in a slow, deliberate sequence. Rin joined the landing team, his hands shaking as they entered the ancient passageway, the walls etched with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Inside, the air was thin and cold, yet breathable, a faint mist hanging in the corridors, as if the place had been sealed for longer than humanity had existed. They reached a central chamber where a sphere floated above a dark pool of liquid, the sphere's surface swirling with shifting lights that seemed to mirror the thoughts of those who looked at it. The hum grew louder, and words formed in Rin's mind, not spoken, but pressed into his thoughts like the weight of a deep ocean. It told of the swarm's origin, how it had been born from a failed attempt to create a self-repairing defense system against an ancient war, how it had devoured its creators and grown until it consumed whole galaxies before being driven here, trapped by the weapon that now lay before them. The sphere warned that activating the weapon would destroy the swarm, but also collapse the star into a singularity, tearing apart everything within light years. Mara asked the question that hung over them all: was the sacrifice worth it? Rin thought of Earth, of the cities, and people who did not even know what was coming, who still believed the stories were myths, and panic born from fear. He knew the answer before he spoke it. The team returned to the fleet, and Voss gave the order the weapon would be armed, and the fleets would lure the swarm into the trap. They sent out a transmission on every known frequency, broadcasting coordinates that would draw the swarm in, the message crafted to sound like the fleets were crippled and hiding near the dying star. The wait was short, the first distortions appearing on the sensors. Within hours, the swarm flowing in greater numbers than before, filling the void with its shifting black mass. The fleets moved into position, forming a wall between the swarm and the weapon, their guns firing in steady rhythms to hold the enemy's focus, every hit and counter-hit lighting the dark like a silent storm. The swarm pressed harder, sensing the kill fragments breaking past the defensive line, only to be met by mines and interceptors fighting to the last. Rin watched from the command deck as the sphere within the ring began to glow, its light brightening until it painted the dying star in silver and white, the hum now a roar in his skull. Mara called out that the line was breaking, ships burning across the black, some torn apart by the swarm's endless advance, but the signal came for Voss hold the line one more minute. That minute stretched into forever, the swarm tearing into the front ranks, while the weapon's light reached a blinding peak, the star itself trembling as if it knew what was coming. Then, with a sound that was not sound but felt in the heart of every living thing, the sphere unleashed its power. A wave of pure force erupted from the ring, tearing through the swarm like wind, through smoke, every fragment burning into nothing as the light consumed them. The star collapsed in an instant, drawn into itself, until it became a point of darkness, the gravity pulling at everything, the fleets racing to escape as the void around the weapon twisted and screamed. Ships burned, engines beyond their limits, the gravity tearing at their hulls, some breaking apart before they could clear the edge of the collapse. Rin's ship shook as the darkness pulled at them, the deck groaning, the lights flickering, until with a final burst they broke free, the black hole shrinking behind them as they fled into the quiet of normal space. The swarm was gone, not a trace left behind, only the memory of its hunger and the silence it left in its wake. Voss gave the order to return to human space, their numbers reduced, their ship scarred, but their mission complete. When they reached the edge of known space, the Council hailed them with disbelief, the truth now undeniable. Yet no celebration, came only a heavy understanding of what had been lost and what had been risked. Rin looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there the same hunger might still exist in other forms, and that the weapon they had used was now gone forever. Mara stood beside him, her voice quiet, saying that Earth would never know the full cost, only that it had been spared for now. The fleets moved on toward home, the void stretching ahead, endless and silent, yet carrying the weight of the choice. They had made the choice to gamble everything on one final strike against the dark, and to live with the shadows that choice would always carry.